too. Don't want to forget that. Awesome. So we're just going to be kind of going over Git basics, right? So that would be anything to do with regular old Git or GitHub. And we're going to also be going over some terminal commands and stuff like that. So, I know that a lot of people that filter into these sessions typically are throughout all different parts of the program. You may be in WebFun or you may be in, projects and algorithms. So we've got all different types of levels of people here, which means we're going to have all different types of levels of questions. And so we're going to have, I believe Josh is in the main room directing people right now, but he's going to be popping in pretty soon here. And he'll be able to answer any questions you guys have in the chats. And if you guys have any questions that you want to ask me, just use that little reactions button at the bottom for your on your Zoom toolbar, and just raise your hand, and I'll address your question. So if that sounds good, we'll go ahead and get started here. Go ahead and share my screen with you. Let's see. All right. So let's get that chat open so I can see that as well. So yeah, basically, like I had said before, we're going to kind of go over how to, first off, find information on Git and GitHub within Discord, because Discord is going to give us a little bit of a link that we can use to essentially traverse some websites that our instructor, Melissa, has put together for you. It's super helpful. And so I'll go ahead and show you how to do that, as well as kind of go over some terminal commands, some Git commands, kind of cover the differences between Git and GitHub. But yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started with that. I'll go ahead and pull up my Discord here. And as you can see, I've got like a million channels. You guys won't see that because I've got I have to be able to see every channel so I can help every channel as a TA. So, but you will have a couple of these guys, right? So what I'm looking at right now, and I'll go ahead and make this bigger for you too, is this little Dojo Hall link, right? And that's going to be typically how you'll find your way in here. So I imagine you guys probably know how to get to that link. But if you don't, this is important. So you'll click on this little Dojo Hall link here, and you'll go to the top and you'll see that little link up at the top that says PT Bulletin Board. And what that means is Part-Time Bulletin Board. And this is essentially where all of the information lives for anything that may be important, especially with Git. So this is going to be where you're going to want to go ahead and check out with the actual Git information if you're looking for that. So obviously you're going to find all this stuff about Dojo Hall, and that's super helpful. But what you're going to be looking for is this little blogs link up at the top. It's a little drop down, and that's going to give you that Git link, right? So you just go to this home page, this part-time program bulletin board, and you'll hover over blogs and press Git. And this will essentially take you to this page that, again, instructor Melissa's put together for you guys. And it kind of goes over different sessions that we have. We are going to be covering basics. So we're in session 1. And this is typically a rolling series. So I'm running session 1 this go around. And I believe either Josh or TA Stephanie is going to be running session 2 and 3. But you can kind of find out more information as you get more advanced. You're obviously going to want to look at more of the sessions. A lot of these later sessions are going to be very helpful when it comes to projects and algorithms, because you're going to have to work in a group on a project, and you're going to have to figure out how to use Git together, because that's going to be how you guys are going to be able to collaborate on your code, and so on and so forth, right? So with this page comes with some recordings. So if you click that YouTube playlist link, you can actually go back and you can find a recording of your choosing. If you say, like Josh's teaching style, you want to go back and take a look at session 2 or session 3, you can go ahead and click on one of these, and you can find your way to a different session that was held. It's all very similar information, right? We try to cover the basics every time, but that's where you can find all those recordings. So if I wanted to close that out and take a look at the rest of this page here, this is kind of some these are some diagrams that kind of visualize the process of Git and GitHub and the commands and all that stuff. And so this is not necessarily going to be exactly what we're covering today, but we'll cover some of this. But then the important one too is this little website link, and that's what we're going to be using to kind of take a look at a lot of the basics here. So it'll take you to this website.
Have another Twisted Tea. Can I Venmo you for it?
Oh, I think we got a hot mic. Hold on one
Really?
second. Cool.
You got it.
All right. Thank you. All right. So when we are talking about Git and GitHub, does anybody have a best guess at what Git is? Feel free to use the chat too, or you can raise your hand and we can. A language? Okay. Yeah, it's definitely a language in the terminal. You know, I wouldn't say it's like a traditional programming language, but it is absolutely an application almost, if you will, that holds its own syntax and its own commands. So yeah, we could call it a language. What is it used for? Does anybody know?
I would say it's used for version control.
Version control. Right, and that's a big fancy word, right? So version control, if we were to go take a look at the Git website. So Git is a free and open source distributed version control system. So there's that fancy word, right? What that means is it's designed to handle everything from small to large projects with speed and efficiency. So this allows us to essentially track our work, and it allows us to save our work. And when we combine it with GitHub, we can actually push our work up and save it in a cloud repository, right? And so can anybody tell me, do you think Git and GitHub are the same thing, or are they different? Same. Okay, yeah, so you would think that they are the same because the Git is in the name, right? But they actually are completely different things. So Git is going to be a version control system that tracks our changes, and GitHub is going to be a cloud repository, a website, if you will, where they hold essentially what's called a repository, and those repositories allow us to save our work to the cloud. It saves our work to the internet, right? So there's a lot of awesome uses with GitHub, but yeah, GitHub is a web-based platform. Exactly right. And that's kind of where we can put our work. So not only can you find your work, you can save your work, so you don't have to keep it all on your computer if you're running out of space. I know, you know, space is expensive on a PC. But you can also show off your work to recruiters, to employers, to people that actually are looking for, you know, people that they want to hire, right? And so what you can kind of put onto your GitHub account is essentially your code, and you can either make a public or a private repository. They can come in and they can be like, oh, this is awesome. I love the way that they're coding this out. I love the way the concepts that they're using, right? And they can also see how often you are actually using GitHub. They can see how often you're pushing work to GitHub. And so it's just a great way to kind of track your work and record your work, not only for you, but for your employers. So GitHub is, again, very different from Git, but they use each other in a sense. So this is my GitHub, right? And so you're typically going to see two different views that are standard. So if I were to go and try to find GitHub online here, it's going to show me a different view, right? But they're both the same thing. And you can essentially navigate this to find your repositories, right? So I can click on all my repositories here, and I can kind of scroll through here and find all the work that I've done. And I can also go to my overview. And if you take a look at these like little green boxes, these actually track how much you're pushing code onto your GitHub account, right? And so yesterday I had 12 contributions, right? And so an employer coming in and seeing, you know, a full 365 days filled out of you coding is a very good thing. You know, that's something that you want your employers to see. Just that you're working hard, that you're coding a lot, that you're constantly practicing. That's the kind of stuff that you're actually going to want to display to your future employers, right? But going back to Git, because we'll come back to GitHub when we're going to be pushing up some work. Yeah, definitely pretty cool. So if you're trying to actually work with Git, there is something that we have to open and use to actually use Git commands. Does anybody know what that thing is called that we have to open and navigate through? That we can use Git commands inside of? Yeah, Git bash is a version of this thing. Right, a terminal. There we go. Yep. So a terminal, that's going to be kind of how we can navigate through our system, through our operating system, through our local storage, all that stuff. And that's how we can kind of use commands that are given to us with Git when we install it. And we can essentially navigate through our system. We can track changes. We can, you know, manage files, programs, and ultimately just interact with our computer's operating system, right? So if you don't have Git yet, what you can do is there is a little section in your Web Fundamentals module that you can go find that covers Git, and it'll cover how to install it and how to configure it. But once you do that, you'll be able to use their commands that come with their system, right? So I'm going to open up a couple of my terminals here because ultimately there are a few terminals that you can use. I've got Git bash. This is my preference, and this is also something that the platform teaches because certain terminals come with different basis, meaning that a lot of terminals are based off of other terminals. So Git bash is kind of one of the OGs, if you will, and they come with a lot of really awesome commands that maybe command prompt wouldn't have or PowerShell wouldn't have, right? Most terminals do share a set of commands that you can use, but my preference personally and what we also teach is Git bash. So I would highly recommend going on and installing and configuring that. But it's absolutely not required. You can use any terminal that you want to. And also, yeah, to cover what Josh just said too. So Mac users, they have a built-in terminal, and that's just called the ZH or the ZSH. Something I don't remember. Josh, is it called? What does it stand for? Z shell. Thank you. But it stands for Z shell. But like he said in the chat there, it is bash based. So they're going to have pretty much the same commands there. They're going to look a little bit different, but they're going to very much so operate very similarly. And then another one is command prompt, right? So there's just 100 terminals that you could probably use if you wanted. But personally, I'm going to use Git bash. So I'm going to close these guys out. And what I'm also going to do is show you guys here what you can do inside your VS Code, because you don't necessarily have to use what's called a GUI, a graphic user interface, right? So that's what this is for Git bash. I'll make this bigger for you. So this Git bash comes with its own terminal, but what we can also do is open up a terminal inside of our VS Code. At the top there, if you see that little terminal tab at the taskbar, you can open up a new terminal, right? And that new terminal is going to pop up down here. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before, but I actually have my terminal configured to be a bash terminal. And you can also do this too, and I'll show you how in a second here. But before I go any further, I want to do a pulse check. Does anybody have any questions about anything we've covered so far? I know it's going kind of fast. Be happy to answer anything you guys have. Good so far? Okay, cool beans. So yeah, just to kind of briefly visit back to what we've covered so far, we've talked about where to find your Git blog, right, where the website is found to give you very basic Git and GitHub information. We've talked about the difference between Git being a version control system, and GitHub, which is a cloud repository service online. And now we're kind of going to jump into terminal work. So before we can load up as many projects as you want, then Yeah. GitHub is unlimited. It's awesome. Right now, I think I've got almost 150 repositories on there. So you can just keep pushing. In fact, it's fun to just load them all up and get the highest number you can. It's fun that way. But anyway, yeah. So if you want to use your graphic user interface right here for your terminal, you absolutely can. But you can also use the integrated terminal inside of your VS Code. And the integrated terminal is super cool because you can see it while you're coding, right? And typically, if you are a Mac user, you'll have a default terminal of that ZSH, that shell, that built-in Mac terminal, right? But if you are a Windows user, you're probably going to be using PowerShell right off the bat. PowerShell is not personally my favorite because it kind of comes with some bugs, and it also doesn't come with all the git command, or I should say the bash commands. So what you can do if you want to configure your default terminal in your VS Code to be bash is you can go to View up at the top, and you can click Command Palette, and you can actually go ahead and type in terminal, select default profile, right? So you're seeing it right here. It's already saved. Once you use it once, it'll save up there. So you'll click that, and then you'll have all your options kind of pop up here. And you can configure what essentially pops up the second you open a new terminal. So the type of terminal that will pop up, right? So I have mine set to bash. I would recommend, if you're a Mac user, stick with the ZSH. I can't say it for whatever reason today. But I would stick with your built-in terminal. It's awesome, and it's bash based, so it's definitely a good terminal system to use. But you can set that, and when I mean it's a default terminal, that typically means that it'll pop up as a bash terminal the second I click this button, right? So you can see that on the side here. They're both bash terminals. And you can kind of navigate through this as well. This is kind of a helpful interface here, but you can open up different terminals, so you're not stuck with bash if you don't want bash, right? You can open up command prompt, you can open up PowerShell, whatever you want to use. But you can see next to get bash here, that's my default. And you can open up as many as you want, right? I can open up 100 terminals, and you can what's called kill the terminals. It's a little violent, but you can trash the terminals, if you will, over on the right there. And then another thing you can do with this VS Code terminal is you can actually split it, which is personally very helpful for the MERN stack when you're opening up your client and your server. So you can split that terminal up, and you'll see on the right that they're almost connected in a way. But you can essentially run your server on the right and your client on the left, whatever you want to do, right? So there's a lot of different things you can do. This is why I personally use the VS Code terminals, because it has more user intuitiveness, if you will. It's nice to use. It has a lot of features, and you can navigate it just the same, right? This is indeed a bash terminal. It's just integrated into VS Code. So it's the same, but it's in my VS Code window. So does anybody have any questions about any of that before I move on? Anything you guys want me to cover again? Nope. Okay, awesome. All right, so let's see, where are we here? So, okay, if you take a look at our terminals here, I'm actually just going to work inside of my VS Code terminal, so I'll make this bigger for you. If you take a look at the terminal, kind of what pops up immediately is this, first off, right here, right? This is going to be my system's name. So this is essentially my user, because my last name's Cordova, and I have my laptop name, right? So that's just going to be my system. And then Ming's W64, I think, is just the version of my bash terminal. And so it just represents bash. And then you'll see this little tilde right here. That's called a tilde. That means your root directory, right? So that's the very, very beginning of your file path. And you'll see these little forward slashes. Every single time there's a forward slash, what that means is we are stepping in a step further into our file path. So if you were to look at, let's say, like my file explorer here, right? You've got, let's see. So you've got OneDrive, which is where I keep my work. And then you'll see right here, documents, right? So if I pop that documents open, and then I have my languages, right? So really you can navigate this how you will, right? So I could be anywhere in my system using Git, and I can navigate throughout it. I can change things within it. It's a super helpful tool. So, but this right here, what my point being is that it's your file path, and we can track that specifically with this terminal. Now, I will say some terminals, I believe ZSH does not show you your file path. And I believe a couple other terminals don't either. I think you can configure them too, but I'm not really sure how to do that. So you'll have to look into that. But we're going to kind of go over some of the commands now. So if we go back to that website that I was showing you before, that instructor Melissa built for us, you can click that little link up at the top that says the basics, Git commands. And it gives us this little gray box, and you can click on that, and it's essentially a PowerPoint, right? Actually, hang on one sec. I picked the wrong one. You're going to want terminal commands specifically for this section. So going based off of that file path, right? This shows me my file path, but say you're a Mac user, it doesn't show you. It'll maybe show you your current directory. So for me, if I were on Mac, it would show me MERN, right? But what you can do to check if you can't see your current directories, you can type that pwd command, and what that means is present working directory. Right, and that shows me my entire file path listed out for me. So if I'm not sure what folder I'm in, I can use that pwd command, and it'll show me where I am inside my system. Another thing you can do to, orient your surroundings inside of your terminal here is what's called ls. ls means list. So you can list out all of your folders inside of your terminal, or inside, more accurately, inside of your system. So ls inside of the MERN folder, right? Because it's going to list out everything inside of your current directory. It's going to list out all this stuff, and this is all my content inside of my MERN folder right here, right? It's kind of messy. Don't judge me. And then another thing you can do is navigate through your directory, right? So if I wanted to say navigate forward a space by using my list, right? Let's take a look at maybe where I want to go from my current directory. I'm gonna navigate into my round 2 folder, right? So you can type in round 2. Let me actually make this a little bit bigger. I actually can't see it with my Zoom toolbar down there. So you can click CD, or you should type CD, and what that stands for is change directory. And if you type in most of the file path you're trying to go to, you can actually press tab and it'll autofill it for you. You see it went from lowercase to uppercase right there. This is actually recommended to do because a lot of times, a lot of the issues you'll find that well, not a lot of them, but you'll sometimes come upon issues that are file path related. So like say you're trying to run an application and it's not working and it's giving you this weird error, right? So a lot of times someone will actually accidentally add a space where there's not supposed to be a space in your file path, and it will ruin everything. And you'll end up spending 2-3 hours trying to fix the problem. So if you press this tab, it'll autofill what's in the system already for you, right? And then you can press enter. So notice that / at the end there. That means that, again, that's the directory I'm going into. So now I've moved from MERN to round 2, right? And I did that again with that CD command, change directory. And another thing you can do is you can move backward. So you can do CD space ... and that ... means go back a directory. So I did that, and now I'm back in my MERN folder, right? And the really cool thing is that you can actually chain these commands together. So if I wanted to move all the way in and then all the way back out, I could do that all in one line. So I could say CD round 2, let's let's see, I can go back up to take a look at what do I have here? Maybe we'll do ls first. CD into round 2. ls. Now here's all my stuff in round 2, right? So if I want to go into, I don't know, the very last one, use ref intro, I can go use and then tab, and it'll autofill it for me, right? And I can chain all these together to go all the way back if I want to. So I could say dot dot slash dot dot slash dot dot slash, and that should take me back, let's see, 1, 2, 3 levels. So that'll take me back through round 2, through MERN, and into languages, if my math is correct. Yep. And you can do that forward too. All you have to do is say CD, do the directory name, do another directory name. Remember to put that slash in between them because that's how it knows you're trying to move folders. And I can go back into use ref, right? Like so, and there I am. So you can definitely chain a bunch of these commands together. It's not just change directory that you can chain a bunch of other stuff too. But I wouldn't worry too much about that. Try to get used to the commands themselves first, get to know them a little bit, use them a bit, and then once you get more advanced, then start chaining stuff just to save yourself some time. Another thing you can do is if you're not sure what a command does, you can use the MAN command. And what that stands for is manual. And you can essentially do MAN, and let's say I want to know what list does. Let's see. I think you might have to do like that. Josh, is the manual command, I forget the syntax for this one. Is it
try reversing it and see if that works.
like ls man?
No, actually, I don't think that'll work. Let me try mine.
Maybe my terminal doesn't like that one. I've never used manual, to be honest, because
Yeah, it's working for me, so I'm not sure why. Maybe
Okay,
people-
that's good to know. Yeah, so the syntax for you guys, for whatever reason, it's not working for me, but it's going to be something like that. So man space ls, and that man is supposed to help us. It's not helping me right now for whatever reason, but you can do man space and then whatever the command is that you want to know about, right? Too bad I can't man the man command to get a little bit more information on it. But yeah, so you can play around with that in your terminal. Now, another thing you can do that's kind of cool. Let's say I go back out to my, let's see, my round 2 folder here. And say I want to create a new folder inside of my terminal. So I don't have to go up to like this little spot in VS Code and click that new folder button. Instead, I can do the command mk, which stands for make dir, and that stands for directory. So I can make a directory and I can say git session, right? And that will allow me to make a git session directory. So if I do ls again to list out my stuff. Oh, we don't have man, I guess. Okay, we have help. Let's type in help. Let's try that. Thanks, Stephanie. Check it out. Look at all that stuff. I wonder if I can maybe do help ls.
It would be ls -- help.
ls -- help. Thank you. Awesome. So that gives me all kinds of information. It's a lot of information on the ls command, right? But anyway, so if you're on Windows, use the help command. If you're on Mac, use that manual command, that man command. But going back to making a new directory, it's that mkdir. When you make a new directory, remember you're not automatically put inside of it. So what you have to do is you have to use that cd command again, and you have to actually type in what you want. So I just made a directory called git session. I'm going to cd into that. And you'll notice I don't have anything to start, right? If I do ls, it just gives me back my terminal line. So that's how you make a directory. You can also make a file. So I'm going to do that command here. So that's called touch. And I believe it's different to make a file in the command prompt and the PowerShell. I actually am not familiar with how to do that, but I know that with the bash-based terminals, you can use touch. and you can simply create, let's say, I'm going to say readme .md. So I'm going to make a file called readme with a file extension, file type of MD. And if I list out now, you notice I have that readme.md file in there. Right, so that's kind of fun. Another thing that you can do with that list command is you can actually, and a lot of other commands as well, you can actually do what's called an option. And that's followed up by that dash, right? So when we did ls space dash dash help, that allows us to essentially call on the option. And I'm going to say, let's do ls dash a. And that's going to stand for hidden files. It's all files, right? So it'll show me everything, including my hidden files inside of my Git session folder. So any command sometimes comes with an option that you can add on. For the lists case, you can add on that dash a, and you can look into those options for each command. They're sometimes pretty helpful. Another thing you can do is you can copy something, like a copy of a folder or a file, and you can also move those things around inside of your terminal. I'm not going to mess with that too much, but what you can also do is you can remove things. Now, obviously, if we're deleting things, you kind of want to be careful with that, right? You don't want to go willy-nilly removing everything inside of your directory or the directory itself. That's definitely not ideal. So if, let's say, I want to do remove a file, I can do rm, and then you can list out that file name, right? So readme.md, and I can list out what's in my folder, and I've got nothing, right? So I've removed that readme. You can also do the same with a folder, and that would be rm, which stands for remove, dir, right? And that stands for directory. And then you list out your directory. Let's say, I don't know that I think I actually have to be inside of my round 2. All right, so I'm going to move to my round 2. And I'm going to do rm dir git, and I'll let it autofill. So I'm going to remove my Git session folder. And if I open this up, where are the G's? Yep, it's gone, right? So that's how you can remove stuff. Again, be very careful with that. Yeah, it's kind of, you're kind of out of luck if you delete it through your terminal. So just don't do that unless you're for sure that you want to do that. Another thing that's really cool and handy is you can actually recover old commands inside of your terminal's history here with the up arrow. So you can, if you look at my command line, I'm pressing my up arrow key and I'm finding all my old commands that I used, right? And so when you're like running servers, like in Python, it's really helpful to just be able to press up and then enter instead of having to type out that whole command again. So that's a really fun one. Another thing you can do is, let's say you want to make a new folder, but your system's not letting you for administration reasons, or say you're trying to do some kind of task, but it's giving you an error that you're not, verified to do so. What you can do is the sudo command before any typical command, like let's say mkdir, and you can essentially override the permissions. And that permission sudo command will allow you to just do it anyway. And you kind of want to be a little bit careful with this one. We call it danger mode because your permissions is probably denied because of the way you set up your computer. So you may want to be careful with how you use sudo, but it is handy in a lot of in my cases, I've used it in deployment whenever I deploy an application to a website. So there are use cases for sudo, but you typically probably aren't going to use sudo too much in your everyday. And then another thing you can do is clear. So if you want to just clear everything, right? Now I have a completely clear terminal, no previous commands that if I were to try to scroll up, there's nothing up there. So it just cleans up your terminal essentially. And then you'll notice a couple of these other things too, Nano or Vim, that kind of, it's like a virtual imaging environment. And that's typically not used on a daily basis, so I'm not going to go too far into that. But it's kind of like a more low level terminal that you can access for certain applications. And then another cool thing that you can do is, say you're running a server and you want to close the server. What you can click is Control-C, and that's what will pop up. And that means that you've closed that server, you've closed that folder, whatever it may be. If you're running an application in your terminal, you press that Control-C command and it'll allow you to close it. So that's most of the basics for the terminal as far as commands go. And I'm probably going to go ahead and take a second for a pulse check. How's everybody doing? Anybody have any questions before we move forward? Anybody need me to recover anything? Awesome. All good. Okay. Good stuff. Okay, so we're gonna kind of start to work with Git and GitHub now. I guess we've been working with Git, but we're gonna be working with a little bit of GitHub now. So I'm gonna go to my GitHub account and I'm going to click on my repositories tab up at the top. And I'm going to press new. What that is going to do is it's going to take me to a page where I can create a new repository. Right, so I'm going to click that. And if you're on the other view as well, let me go ahead and cover that one. It's pretty much the same. In fact, it's one step less. Excuse me. Yeah, so you can click that new button just the same, right? It'll take you to a new repository page. I'm going to just go back to my original one. And you can go ahead and name this repository. Typically, I recommend it, you name it based off of whatever assignment or project you're going to push into it. So if I am doing, let's say in this case, a Git workshop, I'm going to call this Git workshop. Right. And if you were to just do a space Git workshop, it'll automatically fill it in with a dash, a hyphen. Right. So I typically keep a pretty good naming convention inside of my GitHub account. So I'm going to do underscores. Either's fine. So Git workshop. And another thing you can do is add a description. So I'm going to say, again, this is optional. You don't have to do this, but I typically will just to keep it uniform, keep it good practice. I'll say hosting Git and GitHub workshop. Right, so this is kind of where you would put any information about the repository. Another thing you can do here is choose whether you want that repository to be public or private, right? Most cases, you're going to want it public. Public allows other people to come in and see your work. Now, when you're, going to school like this, you're going to want to create a record of your work so that you can show your employers. And if all of your repositories are private, they're going to be like, what's up, dude? Why aren't you letting me see your code? They're going to be like, is there really code in there? So keep it public for the most part. But there is an exception to this. If you are going to push up an exam, to any of the exams here at Coding Dojo, if you're going to push up an exam to GitHub, you're going to want to press private. You do not want other students to come in and see your work, right? So just avoid that. Do public. And if you're going to take an exam, do private. Another thing you can do is add a README file from GitHub. I personally don't like to do this option because when I create a repository, I want it totally empty. Because a lot of times when you have something that's on GitHub that's not on, let's say I should be more specific. Once you have something that's on your GitHub repository that you do not have on your local machine, and you try to push up to that, it's going to say, hey, you're a step behind. There's stuff on your GitHub repository that is not on your local machine. You need to fix that. So I typically like to leave it blank. So that way I start with a completely blank repository. And you can also do things like add gitignore files or licenses, stuff like that, right? But I'm going to just leave all that empty. So I'm going to go ahead and create my repository. And what's really nice about GitHub is that they give you your whole slew of commands right here that you're going to need to do to actually push up some work. Right, so I'm going to go back into my terminal over here, and I'm gonna cd into, actually, I think I got rid of it. Yeah, I got rid of that folder that I made. So I'm gonna make that folder again. I'm gonna say mkdir, and I'm gonna call this one Git Workshop, because that's what my repository name is. So I want them to be the same, not required, just my personal preference. So create that Git Workshop folder. And I'm going to cd into that Git Workshop folder. And if I were to try to push up this empty folder, nothing's really going to happen. You actually have to have some content inside that folder. So I'm going to remake that README file. So I'm going to use that touch command, readme.md. And I'm going to open that up inside of my file explorer on the left here. Let's go find it. Where is it? Can't do my ABCs either today. There we go. All right, so there's my folder right there, right? And I'm gonna maybe say, this repo is designed to help students with Git/GitHub, right? And I'll make sure that's saved. I'm on autosave. So once I actually have content in here, what I can do is initialize with a git command, right? This is going to actually be getting into the git commands because they are different from your basic terminal commands. I'm going to initialize my folder. So git init, and notice that they actually give this to you up in the GitHub. I'll make this bigger for you guys. They give this to you in the GitHub commands, right? So git init. What that means is you are adding a git file, in fact, a hidden git file to your folder. And I'll show you what I mean by hidden in a second here. So I'm going to go ahead and press enter on git init. Notice you'll get that little message, initialized empty git repository, and it'll tell you your file path. And notice that thing that is at the very end of that file path. That's what it created. It's called a .git file, right? And that essentially holds the information of, it allows you to use git commands on your folder, right? So it holds the information so that it communicates to the computer that you're going to be doing git commands. So I'm going to do that ls space -a command. Remember that dash is an option, but I'm going to do ls space -a, and that's going to list all my hidden files, right? So that shows me my .git file. If I were to do ls, it does not. Notice that. So .git is a hidden file. If you want to see that stuff, you just have to do -a. But my project folder is initialized, so I can move on to my next command. Typically, what I like to do here is check my work as I go. So I'm going to use what's called a git status command. And what that does is it shows you tracked and untracked files. In this case, it's red, which means it is untracked currently. So it actually gives you a hint here too. If you want to track it, use the git add command, right? So you can either do git add, and you can type out the file name, right? readme.md, like so. Or you can use the all operator. And there are two that you can use. You can either use the period that represents basically adding all tracking all changes, or you can use the asterisk, and that does the same thing. So you can add all your changes and track all your changes that you've made. So if I do that command, git add all, and I get status into that again, you'll see that I've now got some tracked files. They're green now. So this is a way that you can check your work to make sure you're actually not missing a step, right? Another thing that you can do from here, remember you have all of this stuff that GitHub gives you the second you make a new repository. So if you forget, it's totally fine to reference back. But you can do git commit and then -m. Does anybody know what the -m stands for?
Is it a message?
Yep, exactly. So we're going to commit a message, so -m, and you can either type in one word here. So let's say test, like so. But if you're going to have any white spaces, any spaces at all, you need to wrap this thing in a string, quotations, right? So let's say I want to do test for Git. Notice I have 2 spaces in here, right? The terminal does not like spaces without a string wrapping around that phrase. If you try to do test for Git without that string, it would grab the very first word, test, and that's it. So I'm going to commit test for Git message, and you'll notice I get that little message back, right? 1 file changed, 1 insertion, the insertion being my sentence up here, and create mode, and it lists out my file, right? So what I can do to make sure that I actually had that commit message go through is I can do what's called a git log command. So git log, and that lists out every single commit message that you have created. So test for Git, there it is. And it even shows me my timestamp and the author, right? So git log, and sometimes if you have a lot of these, it'll take you into a virtual environment, which we did not cover a lot, but if you don't typically need to be in the virtual environment. If you want to exit a virtual environment, you'll typically type in :WQ or just Q, depends on the virtual environment. But I've got my commit message, so I'm good to move on, right? And I'm going to go back to reference what it's telling me to do. So I'm going to move into a new branch. The way that you can check your current branch is if you're using Bash, it actually shows you, there's my master branch, right? This is the one that comes with my git init file that I added. But I believe what you can do to check your branch is git branch, like so, right? So git branch just lists out my branch that I'm on. And I want to move to a new branch. So I'm going to do git branch dash capital M. Does anybody know what the capital M means? Any guesses?
Is it setting your branch to main?
No, not quite. That's a good guess though. No, it's not quite. It is oh yep, I just see it in the chat there. Nathan, yep, it's move. So we're moving branches, right? And a little I guess a little tip for you guys is GitHub recently updated this, so you don't need it to be capital anymore. It knows in the context of the command itself that you can do a lowercase m here. And I'm going to move to main, right? But capital M is typically how you'll see it on the GitHub website, and that's just to differentiate move from message. Lowercase m is message, uppercase M is move, right? So I'm going to git branch dash capital M main, and notice you'll see this branch right here change when I click enter. So I went from master, which is the default branch, to main. And this is just best practice to change over to a main branch. And you'll typically use this as the parent branch from here. So the next thing that I can do here is I want to go ahead and add a remote origin. And I can do that with this specific command here, this git remote add origin, and then it says my URL. Now, let's say for whatever reason you lost this page and you don't know your URL. Does anybody have any ideas as to how I could find that URL if I didn't have this command listed out for me? I want to recover this URL. Where might it be? No takers? All right, well, you can find it right here. And like they said, Angela, good job. You can find it in your browser, right? Now, obviously this is not going to be that because I'm creating a repository. So you have to be careful about this one because it's not created yet. Well, technically it's created, but I'm at a different page. I'm at a quick setup page. So this would be in this context, the correct command. But let's say I created it and I've pushed all my stuff up. and I find my repository and I'm inside my repository, then you can use that URL as well if you need to check your remote or whatever. But I'm going to just use what they give me. I'm going to copy this exactly how it is, so there's no mistakes. And I'm going to right click and that'll paste that into the terminal for me. And I'm going to press enter. And obviously it doesn't really give you any feedback when you do that, right? So what you could do is git remote space -v, and that stands for version. So I'm checking my remote branches, and I'm going to just verify that this is the exact same thing as what's up here. And it is, right? So we're good to go. So now I have one more command left, right? I've done all my checks. I've done my git status. I added the changes. I tracked the changes. I've committed my message. I've checked to make sure my message was committed. I've added a branch. You can see that on the terminal right here. I'm in my main branch. That's awesome. I'm in the correct folder. And I just checked my remote status, right? And so I'm good to go. I'm good to push this up. So I can do what's called git push -u. Does anybody know what the -u stands for? Upstream. Yep. So -u stands for upstream. So when we're using it in this context, we are setting upstream the origin main. So we are going to set it upstream so that we don't have to actually type this whole command out next time. So I'm going to do git push -u, specify the origin of the branch I want to actually push up to, and I'm going to press enter. And you'll notice everything just pushed up. It'll almost always give you feedback, right? So it's compressed my objects, written them, and pushed them. So what I can do now is I can actually just press refresh on my browser page here, and it should show me what I just pushed. All right. And the cool thing about a README file is that you can actually see it displayed. It's almost a presentational file. It lets you see it right when you jump into the repository, right? And another thing to notice is that this URL is the correct URL now again. But let's say you don't trust that one for whatever reason, you can go to your Git Workshop repository and press code, and you'll have your URL here as well. And I will give you a full disclosure. I've seen a lot of people try to push up, or I should say set their remote origin to an SSH. This will give you problems, so don't do that. Use the HTTPS, right? Use this URL right there. But we have our file up here. It's awesome. Now, you're probably thinking that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of commands that you have to use every time you want to push up. You don't have to do that every time you push up if you've pushed up once and you've set upstream. So let's say I want to add a new bit of text in my README file. This is my second push, right? So it's going to track changes. Notice that little M right there and that little color, that little circle. So that means that we've modified the file, and that means that there are now changes that we probably have not tracked yet. So I'm going to do a git status. And look at that. I've got more changes that I have not tracked. So I'm going to do 3 commands here. And that's going to do exactly what it did before with all those other commands, except it's going to be a lot less work because we've already set upstream. We've already configured our repository. So I can do git add all, git commit -m with a message. I'm going to say second commit. And I'm going to do a simple git push. So I repeat, it's git add all, git commit -m with a message, git push. Once you've already pushed up once to that repository, you don't have to do all those those initial steps again. You can just do those 3 commands. And I'm going to refresh my page, and you'll see that I now have an updated repository, right? So that's kind of going to be the general speak of how you might go about pushing up a project to a repository, right? And typically, unless an instructor recommends that you do otherwise, I typically recommend one project per repository. What I mean by that is if you go to the repository section, you'll notice that I have my repository named based off my assignment, which means I only pushed up my assignment to my repository. So I'll click use ref intro here. Look at that. I have got one assignment inside that repository. And it's like that for all of my repos. So this typically will help you avoid any merge conflicts or problems. I oftentimes see people try to push all their repositories into a parent repository. And those are the people I see the most because they have the most problems from that. So to be honest, don't really see a lot of people have any problems with this process, just pushing up one project to the repository, because there's not really many problems to be had unless you used a bad command or missed a step. So that's how you will create a new repository, push a project and connect it to that repository. And that's how you can make a change to the project like we did. Remember, this is my second push, and add those changes, commit those changes, push those changes, and you're good to go. Does anybody have any questions about any of that? I know that was a lot. Before we move on to the last bit here. Cool. Good to go. Awesome. Okay. And I'm sure that Josh is keeping you up to date with all those questions in there too. So if you have questions you're afraid to ask, just ask the chat. Josh is awesome. He'll answer them for you. Same with Stephanie. So, all right. So the last thing that we're going to do here is, let's say that I want to, let's say I deleted my Git workshop folder. Let's say RM, let's see, Git workshop. Oh, I have to be outside of it, right? You have to be inside of the folder that holds the folder you want to delete. So I'll say RM and Git workshop. So I'm going to remove this folder. Why? Because I'm going to show you how to clone something. So I'm going to say remove. Oh, let's see. Cannot remove Git workshop is a directory. All right. That's fine. Let's see. We'll go back in there real fast. Actually, no, we don't even need to. Let's make a new directory. Let's call this Git workshop 2. And I'm going to navigate into that. And I'm going to clone that repo down onto my machine. So I'm going to go back to that repository. And just to actually make sure that I don't make a mistake here, I'm going to CD back into the original one real fast, Git workshop, and I'm going to do RM-FR, that means force. Be careful with that command. I'm going to remove force the .git file. And notice you'll see my branch disappeared. So I'm going to go back out, and then I'm going to enter my Git workshop 2. Let's see. There we go. And I'm going to clone my repository that I just created and bring it onto my system. And the way that you can do that is by finding that URL, right? So you can either click this one up here, or you can click your code. I'm going to click this one because it gives me a little copy button. Make sure it's HTTPS. And I'm going to do git clone, and then I'm going to paste that URL into my command. And then I believe another thing that you can add on to this, a second argument, if you will, is you can add a file name. So if it, or a folder name, or like if you want to name the thing that you're cloning down, you can do that. But I've already got it named, so I'm going to git clone. And notice you'll see all these things, this feedback for me, enumerating objects, meaning it's counting through, and it's compressing them. And we now should have all the information inside of Git Workshop 2. Right? In fact, we have a duplicate Git Workshop folder, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that README back up there. And I will maybe delete my Git Workshop folder here. And it may not like it because I've got it open currently, but oh well. But the point of this really is to show you that you can take work down into your system that's not originally on your system. You can go to the repository on GitHub and you can take that repository for your own, right? Oh, awesome. Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it. So you have to use that -FR. So it almost bypasses the permissions, if you will, to delete a directory that may not like being deleted, essentially. But yeah, be very careful with that. Those permissions are set in place for a reason. So, but yeah, so basically though, that is pretty much it. That's all I have for you guys. So just to kind of clarify what I just did, I cloned down this whole repository into a new folder. Right, and now I've got the Git Workshop folder inside of this shell, essentially. So what I probably could have done here is I could have just moved out into my round 2 and Git cloned at this level, and it would have brought down my Git Workshop folder just as I have it in my repository itself, right? The Git Workshop repository. So anyway, I mean, does anybody have any last minute questions before we wrap up here? Pretty much done. I think I covered most everything. So if you guys have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Got nothing? Okay. Yep, absolutely. Thank you guys. Appreciate you coming in. If nobody has anything else, then we'll go ahead and wrap it up now. If you guys end up having any questions, just post to your Discord channel and we'll get those questions answered for you. Awesome. Glad you guys found it helpful. That's great. Very cool. All right, guys. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot. See you guys later.